Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Carleen Hempel. I'm chair of the Junction Village Open Space Task Force, and we've called you here today to review with you some work that our committee has been toiling over for the last 6 months. It's been a labor of love, and we are excited to present to you what we have. In the way of welcome, I want to just introduce the committee that you'll hear from tonight, and also some staff, town staff, and consultants that have supported our work over the last 6 months. Again, my name is Carleen Hempel. I'm chair of this 5-person committee. Also present is Harry Bartlett, Krista Collins, Sue Felshen, say hello, Sue, and Bob Hartman. This makes up our 5-member committee. Also present, not this minute, but soon to join us, is Marcia Rasmussen, who's Director of Planning and Land Management for the town of Concord, and Elizabeth Rust, Liz Rust, who manages the Regional Housing Services Office which is housed in Concord. She acts as our liaison to the CHDC, the Concord Housing Development Corporation, which is the owner of this piece of property that we'll be discussing with you tonight. Also present is William Bill Murray. He is the Director of Landscape Architecture and Planning for Littleton-based Places Associates. Bill will be the person who actually presents the 2 concept plans that we want to show you tonight, as well as a PowerPoint that will go through some of the features that we are considering and want your feedback on for this site. I want to give you a little bit of background on who we are and what we've done before I turn it over to Bill. We are talking about 6.5 acres that will encompass what will eventually be an 83-unit affordable assisted living facility on a total of 12.8 acres. And this parcel is located at the end of Winthrop Street between the Assabet River and the MCI Correctional Institute. So when Bill brings forth the concept plan, you'll be able to visualize what I'm talking about. But the 83-unit assisted living facility sits in the middle of the parkland that we're talking about. Tonight, we're not going to be discussing the housing. We're only going to be discussing the parkland, which you will see is comprised of what will be a meadow on one side and a fairly extensive trail network on the other side that lines the Assabet River. What we're talking about is a total of 6.5 acres. The CHDC is responsible for developing another 4+ acres. That's going to be the housing facility in the middle. In 2020, Concord's Select Board appointed us to sort of shepherd through the idea of what will happen to this open space. And so that's what we've been working on through this time. Just in general, we envision this as parkland that will be used by all sorts of populations, all sorts of constituencies across Concord and beyond, including local residents, rail trail users, very importantly, patrons of the village businesses. We imagine they'll stroll over there with their ice cream or their lunches. Children from the local daycare and education centers. It's a quick walk down the very safe bike path. Also importantly, visitors to the MCI Correctional Institute. This is a constituency that we feel to date we really have done nothing to welcome, and this path, the path of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, is smack dab in the middle of what is a journey for some via the train to the MCI facility. And of course, visitors and residents of the 83-unit affordable assisted living facility. Again, this will be a safe, fully accessible network of trails and reflection spaces for them. Just again, in the way of sort of broadly speaking about the topic, we envision a multi-year process that begins with significant invasives removal. And Bill will talk about this a little bit in terms of the multi-phased plan that we are imagining. A quick word about format. Bill is going to go through his two concept plans. These have been whittled down from 3. We have been discussing them for many weeks. And so what we're presenting to you, it's important to note, is not an either or. It is, they represent ideas that we have brought together over many, many discussions. And so what ultimately comes out of this will be one plan that we will present in a similar forum to this after the start of the new year. And it will be a combination it could be a combination of what we look at now. It could be based on additions that we hear in terms of your feedback today. And also there's a Natural Resources Commission process that has to go, has to be set into motion too. So there's a lot of factors, but again, we have come a long way to be able to present these plans to you. After Bill presents both the schematics as well as his PowerPoint, we're going to open up the floor for you to comment, reflect, discuss, ask questions. You can do that in 2 ways. You can, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A tab. You can click that and ask a question there. And my colleague, Krista Collins, will read those at the end of Bill's presentation. You could also, right next to that to the left, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little raise hand feature. If you click that, it will put up a hand and it will allow us to know, we can't see you right now, but it will allow us to know that you want to ask a question. And we'll enliven your screen, at which point you can ask your question to any of us, myself, Bill, Liz, Marcia, any of the committee members. It's important to note, though, that you must state your name and your address for the official record. And through that, we hope to hear your comments, your concerns, your feedback about what we're going to present. With that, I think I'm all set. So, Bill, if you're ready, why don't you take it away?
Okay. Hey, everyone. Just a quick introduction. My name is William Murray. I'm a registered landscape architect in Massachusetts. My firm is called Places. We're planners, landscape architects, civil engineers, and surveyors, permit specialists. We've been in business in Littleton since 2010, actually a little longer. We're a Massachusetts certified woman-owned business, and we were originally retained on the project to provide surveying and wetland support, which morphed into the landscape architecture. I'm going to repeat some little bit of what Carleen has said, but I've got a little outline that I want to stick to if I can. Our design objectives were to make sure, and the design objectives were established by the committee with guidance, of course, from staff and my office. First and foremost is that any park that we develop has to be fully accessible, so that we're going to propose all the pathways, all the walkarounds, all the plazas will meet ADA and Massachusetts criteria for accessibility. The development has to be compatible with the assisted living facility, so that we have to work hand in hand. And you'll see when I show the drawings why that's really critical. Maintenance of the natural environment along the river's edge was highlighted as a very important characteristic of the project. The river's edge along this, virtually most of the project, is a very, very steep and tall embankment with a lot of mature trees. The committee really wanted the creation of open space that serves multiple users and uses, incorporating art, performing art, and visual art, if possible. We want to acknowledge the site's historic nature, the Civil War muster site that occurred in 1859, acknowledge the impact of MCI Concord and the Concord Reformatory on the town of Concord in this area, and above all, keep environmental sensitivity in mind with all of the design components, so that we're going to be using only indigenous plant species. High on the list is the elimination of invasive species, which include Oriental bittersweet, invasive honeysuckle, Japanese knotweed, and multiflora rose. And then finally, low maintenance requirements, because we still aren't sure where this is ultimately, who's going to be responsible for it. So I'm going to pull up on the screen the first plan so that we can get to a description. Panelists, can we see the plan? Okay.
Yes, Bill. Yep.
Okay. I can zoom in and out. If anybody has any questions, just type it in, and I can zoom in and out. First, I just want to show the overall site. The site that we're working on is divided in two pieces, and you can see in the center, that's the assisted living facility, smack dab in the center, and occupies, from north to south. So we bisect it through a common path that is allowed. On the left side is what we call the triangular piece. So if you ever hear anybody refer to that, that's the westernmost portion of the site, which is about 1.4 acres. And the easternmost portion goes to the center line of the Assabet River. It's mostly rectangular, the area that we're working in. And it is, for the most part, we're going to be using a singular walk system through it, connecting back. Down here, all kind of traversing at a 30-degree angle across the bottom of the plan, is the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. This portion of the land, and I'm going to go to a different drawing now. So the triangular portion is principally occupied a little bit by an existing meadow, and it's a wild meadow, but I wouldn't call it a wildflower meadow. It's a lot of grasses. And on the northerly side, where it butts MCI Concord, it's been used by MCI Concord as a storage space for earth materials, sand and gravel, and a portion of it is paved. So it's a barren landscape to the north and northwest, and a kind of lush meadow that's fun to walk through on the southerly portions. When we go to the larger portion of the site, all along the river is densely wooded, mostly with mature oaks. We have a Sumac grove, which we'll show in our color drawings down here that we want to maintain. And then these upper portions are previously disturbed land areas. And I think what they were, they're rectangular berms that form spaces. And I think that they were once open sewage lagoons or something like that, but they're now naturalized, fully grown over. But there are invasive species in all portions of the site, mostly on the easterly side against the Assabet River. So we have riverfront wetlands, riverbank, bordering vegetated wetlands on this easterly side, just barren landscape on this westerly side. And the designs that we're going to be presenting, and there are only two, and they have been whittled down, and you'll notice that there are going to be a whole lot of commonalities, because as we work through the design process, it became apparent that a singular path through to the easterly side seemed to make the most amount of sense. And then, so therefore, the designs really, we emphasize the entry area over here on the westerly side, and some of the activities are slightly different between the two schemes. So this is what we call scheme 1B. And focusing on the triangular piece, we have a large paved area with a central focus point, which hasn't been determined. It could be a large tree, could be a piece of art, could be pavement art, but that's the thought. The thought is that because this is intended to be a pedestrian-friendly park, we would have signs at our entry points to say no bikes allowed, and bike racks would be provided. Benches are going to be provided throughout the project at our various plaza areas. So this design has a central area, which we think will be a gathering area. It will be an invitation area. And we're hoping it is the focal point of, let's go to the park and we're going to meet at the entry. So that's what we're hoping here. We have two plazas that are isolated, and we think we're going to elevate them slightly. The northerly one will describe the effects of MCI Concord and the benefits that it's provided to the town. And it will give a history of MCI and some of the residents of the facility. The southerly one will discuss the fact that this property was used in 1859 as a muster for all of the units that left from Massachusetts or initially left from Massachusetts for the Civil War. So it was a significant muster location for all of the Massachusetts infantry regiments, et cetera, and that's part of the history of the site. We then have 3 separate wildflower areas. And again, we said that pollinator gardens and environmental sensitivity was going to be a hallmark of this project. We have an isolated little plaza, which is intended to have a bench or 2. And the thought being it would be a nice private space. But again, because it's moderately open, it's shielded from the rail trail, shielded a little bit from the affordable living, but still open so that you can see into it from the path. And we're not creating these isolated remote spaces. We have a path, both schemes share the same path, and we're proposing to line this path with split rail fence on both sides. So it's very clear, you know, when you enter the area of the assisted living, that your pathway is to continue on and not interrupt or travel into the assisted living. So this scheme shows a couple of neat features. We have trees along the northerly edge here because you can see into MCI and you can hear a little bit of Route 2 and the rotary. The idea is to plant this area with a low meadow configuration, so a grass that's not highly maintained, and some shade trees. The intent being it will be a pollinator friendly space. It would be a nice space in the spring where you could sit under a tree and read a book. But it's not going to be severely mowed grass. South of that, and our path that traverses, is what's proposed, an earth-formed amphitheater. So the stage would be level with the existing ground behind it, and we would earth form a series of circular steps that would go down to a lower level. So that would all be planted. We'd use concrete block to make a vertical seat. To the south of that, we would have a picnic lawn, and all of this would be made accessible to the public. So it's an active recreation space area. We're trying to do performance art. You could also use it for any other passive. It would be a great place in the spring to hang out, read a book, listen to music, or something along those lines. We have a plaza that's just a casual plaza, the thought being this could be a meeting space prior to entering the amphitheater. If you came around and some kind of performance was going on, you'd meet here and then you'd go into the amphitheater. But it also gives you a pretty dramatic look across the river at a moderately steep portion of the embankment. We travel southerly a little bit. And again, we have these 2 small secluded sheltered nooks, which are intended to be, you know, a small gathering or personal space, but yet one would be in an open meadow type area. The other would be in the maintained forest. And I'll get to the maintained forest in a little bit. This red-orange area is the existing Sumac grove, which we're hoping to maintain. Right now, it's got some invasives in it. It will need a little bit of maintenance, but it's a semi-open area. You can see through the Sumac, but the Sumac does give us a pretty good grove aspect. Here is a southerly plaza, and this southerly plaza is really intended as an overlook. So it's going to have some signage describing the confluence of the Aspet River and the adjacent brook. You can see over that, you can see some of the peninsula that sticks up later in the summer. And there's an extremely steep embankment here that it sits on the top of. So it's a pretty prominent land feature, and it's a pretty prominent design feature. Then we travel along the path and we exit towards the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail with a smaller plaza and entryway. Again, both plazas and entryways, the intent is to have a kiosk or some sort of signage to say, please no bikes. If you have dogs, they must be on a leash, et cetera, whatever the rules that are ultimately decided for the park. There would obviously be a bench. There would obviously be a bike rack because the intention, again, is this is a pedestrian facility. You'll see on both of these plans, these little square black dots that appear along the path. And the intention of these is to be some sort of a display device. Right now, the intention, and we'll show you in our slideshow what we're actually talking about, is granite plinths of different granite slabs of different heights that would be placed along the trail where artwork could be mounted, and you could have a display of differing kinds of any kind of artwork that was proposed. Additionally, or in addition to, you could mount on them page holders, and they could become the story path, and they would be the walk around for children to read the story as they walk along the paths. So that part hasn't been defined in a great amount of detail. Maybe we'll separate those and we'll have some plinths just for artwork and some stands for the story path, but that is the intent. So this is scheme 1B. Scheme 2B looks amazingly similar in some aspects. We've changed the design of the entry. We've moved it a little bit south. It's a smaller entry. There's a little bit more area of lawn, and we've taken the components. The previous scheme, you can see we have an entry and a singular path that directs you in the easterly direction, so that you have a pretty strong idea of the travel path. With this one, we're trying to break that up a little bit. Yes, you have the entry and a travel path, but now you have the option to go off into slightly a more secluded plaza, interpretive plaza, here for the history, here for the cultural benefits of the prison. Again, we're showing this is mostly a meadow area that has no trees. So we're supplementing it with substantial tree plantings and again, maintaining wildflowers. But in this case, compared to the previous one, where they're central to the scheme and they bisect it, this one we're framing the entry with wildflowers. The other significant change to the design is the area where the amphitheater used to be. So there's the round amphitheater. Now, instead of an amphitheater, we're proposing a recessed lawn. So as I had said before, we have an earth form that's rectangular there already. So we want to utilize that earth form and simply make a recessed lawn with a seat wall all the way around. And then the tan area would simply be the steeper slopes that we'd plant with some sort of evergreen or something to hold it in place. And then we'd have a higher picnic lawn. So it's very similar to the amphitheater. The difference here is this is intended to be a passive recreation use, and there's no defined space or function for that use. Again, the same intent up on the north, because it just seemed to be a commonality that the committee liked a lot: art displays, benches, and a meadow area just to the north of it. So this is the remainder of this phase. Whoops, I don't even know what that is. Mimics what happened on the other. So the difference here on the scheme is really the recessed lawn and kind of a more non-linear progression through the various parks. So those are the two schemes, and we can come back. So this is 2B. That one was 1B. And if I change the screen, we have a PowerPoint show. Come on, PowerPoint.
Bill, I think you need to stop sharing and then come back in with the PowerPoint.
Okay. How's that?
Yep, we can see it, Bill.
Okay, I'll go through this fairly quickly. We're just trying to give images of the thought process of some of the materials and of the site itself. So the park is served to give information about the site history, the impact on the present and future, and a peaceful setting for continual learning, listening, discussion, mutual respect. some pictures of the site. Here's the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in the center. You will notice there's a crossing identified on the rail trail. It's at the end of Winthrop Street. So the crossing is already marked. It's very easy to tell where the proposed road for the assisted living facility will be. Our connections will be down by MCI Concord and just a little bit to the south of where it says Xing on this photograph. Here's a picture of many of the committee members. They've been out there multiple times. And in the background, you can see what I'm talking about on the triangular piece where it's a barren landscape. You know, they had compactors, they have soils, they have everything else. And then as you get to the southerly portion, you can see the beautiful meadow that exists in that area. So then we go over to the other parcel, the easterly parcel, and here's a view of the river. There's an existing path that travels along a portion of the top of the bank, and you can see the mature oaks and the beautiful path that goes through. Here we have the Sumac Grove and portions of the Sumac Grove. And then here are portions of the area of the site where the amphitheater or the recessed garden would go. You really can't see the landforms here, but it's moderately wooded in this area. So the northeast area, just to the north of either the recessed garden or the amphitheater, we were thinking of this type of a landscape, a meadow where people could gather. In the easterly portion where we're describing we have shade trees, we want a lawn area against the paths, and then we want wildflowers or ground cover on it, proposed trees. The idea being the lawn area and the path gives you a clear area, and then this is pretty much don't tread on me, doesn't prohibit you from going in the area, but it is preserving open space and meadow. Just some idea of some of the perennial grasses that we use for some of these wildflower areas. The hardscape components, because I did mention on both of the designs, we have a circular entry area, and we'll get into those. Interpretive panels, we have different types of interpretive panels that we've presented to the committee. They've made no decision at this point, but we're just trying to show people what we're talking about. Bicycle racks will be required because we do want to keep it a pedestrian friendly space. The paths are not overly wide to reduce the environmental impact, but if we have to allow bicycles in, then we have to make the paths twice as wide so two people can walk along the path and a bike can safely pass them. We talked about the story walk. There are different ways of doing this. All a story walk is a book that essentially has been copied or taken apart, and the pages put in an incremental fashion, and children wander along the paths, observing nature and participating in the story walk, whatever it is. I've seen quite a few of these, and the kids really appreciate them. As you can see, they're appreciated. Historic signage, again, nothing's been defined, but we have found some that are really informative, attractive. We mentioned kiosks at the entry, which we think are a very good idea. They would be minimalized, but still address the overall park. And there are a lot of different types that we can talk about. Some wayfinding signage, as the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is really good at. Additional signage to introduce our project and some of the aspects of the project. My favorite, the skunk cabbage sign. That one's a little complex. This type of signage is being used in South Boston and the Emerald Necklace in Boston, and we really liked it. It's durable, and it has a pretty good appearance. And as you can see, it's got a real straightforward, pre-established set of rules for the park, which of course would be customized for this project. Here we go. This is what we were talking about when we were talking about the plinths. We were thinking of granite cubes or rectangles of different height. They would have a 3-bolt mounting pattern already drilled into them, so that if an artist wanted to display some sort of physical art, they could accommodate the 3-bolt pattern and mount it right to it. equally so, we could put the storybook, we could mount it right to the top, and it could be used for both things, not necessarily at the same time. Some different paving colors and patterns. And this is something along the line of what we're thinking of for the plaza entrance. The committee really is interested in having a theme to this park of some sort that reflects the cultural, historic, and environmental significance, or what they would like to have, what they would like you to come away with after visiting this park, and something along this with words, maybe in a band here, that identify the intention of the park would be helpful. Something along this, maybe we could do a medallion along those lines. And again, those words and the intention are still being discussed by the committee. A little more elaborate. We found material for binder for aggregate services surfaces. It's currently installed at Walden Pond, and they found it to be a pretty durable thing, so that we are intending to have the main path made out of asphalt, because it's a very low maintenance, easy material. But the side paths would be probably this kind of a surface, so that it is completely inert. Water passes through it, and it's safe. And we're pretty excited about looking at it, and we're still looking into it, but this is what we were thinking for the side paths. Bench seating, if we have a smaller circular area and we want to accommodate a lot of people. Again, the committee is not committed to any of these things, but we all like the ideas. The play table is probably a really neat idea for one of those solitude spaces or a bigger space. And different types of benches. And you'll see that, and I've been pushing a metal bench, because even though that's a recycled plastic bench, I don't like wood or plastic benches because they're just too easily vandalized. And a metal bench stays in place, and it isn't subject to that kind of degradation. And that's the end of the slideshow. So I did try and keep it brief, but we have a lot of information about the facility, about the history, and the committee has gone into great depths on all of the topics that I discussed. And so if anybody has any questions, I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to answer them to a reasonable degree.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was an incredible presentation, full of information. One thing that I wanted to mention to the group was we had a similar forum that many of you, I think, probably attended, where we called together historic or history experts and scholars to talk about the significance of this space. This was very affecting to us. And we can talk about that in further detail if you have questions about it. But we learned from that we really, as Bill mentioned, we really want to emphasize a few aspects of this site, and that's what we're talking about with the interpretive panels, the critical, important history that the Reformatory and Correctional Institute has meant as an economic engine, and just a progressive place then and now. And it's fairly central to this part of West Concord, and we want to embrace that, make sure people understand that, and also understand some of the people who have been in there over time, including Malcolm X, who actually converted to Islam while he was inside that facility. Another, of course, is the mustering site that Marcia knows most about on our committee. It was an extraordinary event, unique in all of the region, and it's something that I don't think many people understood the sort of scope and extent of it. And then, of course, Gary Clayton, our friend Gary Clayton, really emphasized this in that meeting, and we really took it to heart, the idea that the Assabet River, which is an exquisite vista there, is a wild and scenic river there. And we want to make sure people understand that and understand what they're looking at. And so we're hoping for some interpretive panels about that as well. So we're not talking about busying up the site with too much information, just 3 discrete sections of this. The other thing I want you all to envision before I kick it back to Bill for one clarification I would love for him to make is, we see this as an opportunity to sort of stitch together what is an incredible collection of open spaces in the village. Think about the Giroux property coming online over at Warner's, which is just down, you just walk down Winthrop onto Commonwealth Avenue, and you're at that magnificent, soon to be available public property. We'll have this property. You walk down Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and suddenly you're in the exquisite Junction Park next to the depot. So, so beautifully designed and maintained by the Green Thumbs. And then you skip across the street to our plaza with our beautiful mural and the sales there. That space. These could all be stitched together when you think about it as this sort of necklace. I know that word is already used in Boston, but this sort of necklace of places that people could go to one from another, and we could even have programming that pushes people from one to another. It's an extraordinary opportunity for us, and so it's important that everyone here envisions that broader perspective. Bill, if you could pull up 1A or 1B, I just would love for you, before we kick it to the full group, I would love for you to just spend a minute more talking about the lawn or grass, because I don't want people to think that we're talking about the sort of lawn you see in your front yard. This is, and I'll let Bill take it, but we're very interested in creating a pollinator habitat, and in addition to the actual wildflowers we're talking about, the grass or the lawn that he's talking about would be a mix that would encourage pollinators as well. Bill, could you give a little bit more context so people don't have the wrong idea of what you're talking about in those spaces?
Sure. Well, as we showed, can people see this screen? Oops.
Yes.
Page up. There we go. In the lower right-hand corner, we definitely want walkable grass adjacent to the paths. And really the reason for that is it's comfortable for a person to have that. You can bypass somebody that's a slow walker on the path. And it also keeps the ticks out of your way. So there's many practical reasons why we want an actual cut lawn next to a path. But that's all we're talking about next to our paths, is that lower right-hand picture really gives the design intent. The other areas are intended to be more of the top left corner, where we have wildflowers. We're going to have specific wildflower meadow areas, but we're going to have other areas that are not intended to be cut except infrequently, and they're going to be allowed to grow in a wildflower configuration. And other areas, as I had said, will be specifically planted for wildflowers and pollinators. So we just recently came across an article from Seattle where they're talking about grasses as a pollinator garden, and they're talking about how it expands habitat. Something that would grow within that grass area would likely be milkweed. Milkweed, of course, would be fantastic for the monarch butterflies. So we want something that's very pedestrian friendly, safe, low maintenance, but all the other areas we want to be far more naturalized and casual. So that's what we're looking at for that one. Try and get out of this. Am I sharing or not?
Not yet.
Okay.
Are you trying to? There you go.
I am. I'm trying.
There we go.
So this is 1B. So along all of these paths, including the stabilized gravel paths, we would have a mowed strip. And then we would have elsewhere, we would have adjacent to pollinator gardens in these outlying areas. That would be that low maintained grass mixture that would eventually become a meadow mixture, but not necessarily a wildflower mixture. And the distinction is the wildflower will take a lot more maintenance than a simple meadow mix. The meadow mix will include something like pollinator friendly vetches or something that are non-invasive and natural, but they won't be specific wildflower. The wildflower has a very specific maintenance regime to keep it a wildflower. These areas would be likely mowed maybe twice a year. And they're really just recharge, open space, naturalized spaces. In the spring, it would be a fantastic place to sit underneath the trees. This time of the year, it would be nice to walk through under the trees and the leaves. But in the summer, maybe you'd stay away from them because of the ticks and some of the other animals that would be in there.
Bill, give us a little quick idea of some of, you mentioned the pin oak, the a hybrid maple silver. Just mention some of the things that you were thinking of that could serve as shade trees there.
Well, the pin oaks, we would think of something we're showing some trees in the wildflower. A pin oak has leaves that grow kind of low to the ground. They aren't your standard oak that grows up and out. And they would provide a nice amount of shade, and they'd be remote from the paths. Yes, we would use oaks and indigenous plant materials. One of the trees that we've been using lately is a Freeman maple, which is a hybridized cross between a silver maple and a red maple, both of which are indigenous. Yes, it's a hybrid mix, but it has the best features of both of those maples, so that the silver maple becomes a big showy maple with yellow leaves, but it's very brittle. The red maple is known as the swamp maple, and it likes wet areas, but the Freeman can withstand both. It's not as brittle. It's a beautiful tree, and it can withstand New England very, very well. Yes, we're also thinking of dogwoods and other flowering plants so that we have a nice mixture. Tulip tree has been mentioned more than once as a beautiful tree. That's a tree that grows very, very tall and has tulip-like flowers. We plant that, in all likelihood, on an edge so that you could see it, but the flowers don't become a nuisance when they drop. And there are an awful lot of trees like that that we can use, and we would use on this easterly edge, the westerly edge. On the easterly side, it does that. On the westerly side, we would, again, on our planted areas, we want a tree like a Freeman maple in our open areas here. We're proposing dense evergreen hedge, and that has yet to be decided because we need to make sure whatever the evergreen is, the deer don't like it. But the closer we get to the river, the closer we're going to start to mimic what the plants are that exist out there today. It is our intent to clean up, especially in this area. If you can see where I'm putting my arrow, we have a lot of invasive honeysuckle, and that honeysuckle has taken over as a mid-height shrub. It grows to about 8 feet tall, and it grows twice as wide. So by removing that, we're going to replace it with our informal meadow area and some trees. But wherever you see the dark green, that's where an existing forest exists. And the only intent there is to remove any of the invasive species that exist there and leave the forest as a forest. By removing the invasives, you'll be able to walk through the forest, I think, where right now it's very hard to do. So it will be an open forest, and it will be allowed to naturalize. And anywhere along the river the riverbank itself will be left completely alone, except for invasive removal. Down here is currently a stand of healthy red pine on the floodplain, and it's a good 20 feet lower than the lookout. And that's going to remain, that's going to be a feature of both of the lookout, where you can see over the confluence of the brook and the river, and the natural environment down there. The only thing that we have to do down there is get some washing machines out of there.
Beautifully presented, Bill. Thank you so much. So at this point, I would love to throw it to the full group to hear what people have to say, what they want to ask. Why don't we start I want to remind you of two things. You could either put a question in the chat, in the Q&A, and Krista Collins will read those off for us, or you could raise your hand and we will allow you, turn on your mic and have you ask the question. Bill will be here at the ready with the schemes so that he can demonstrate what his answers are and what your questions reflect. Krista, why don't you start by giving us a question off the Q&A?
Okay, we've a lot of really good questions. I'm going to try to combine to group some of them together for efficiency. First, there is a technical question. And
Krista, but
sorry?
I do have to get, for the minutes, I have to get names and street addresses of those who ask questions.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, so that'll be a little weird, but we'll do the best we can.
yeah, that is going to
You
be
may have to
challenging.
ask people to state their name when we can't figure it out from the chat, or they can type it in.
Well,
Okay.
Krista would see the names of the people asking the question. So maybe you could just state that name as you ask that question, Krista.
But I will
Yes,
have
I
to
will.
get the addresses, and some names are not, identifiable.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, if I get to someone when I get to the name, we'll ask people to, I don't know if we can ask them to type their addresses in the Q&A. I guess we could, because it's a public meeting. All right, I'm going to ask when I say your name to type your address into the Q&A. And Sue, will you be able to follow the Q&A to?
Yes, I can
track that?
follow.
Okay, thank you.
Pick things up.
Okay, so we had question from Nat Welch and also from Pamela Dritt about why participants can't see the list of other participants. And they felt that was important for a public meeting. And I know that we can see the participants.
I don't know how to answer that question, but perhaps Chris, who's here from the town manager's office, can explain.
Yeah, this is a webinar format. As most people who use Zoom know, there are two formats, regular meeting and a webinar. The webinar is the ideal platform for group presentations and hearing community feedback. We can, at any point during the meeting, announce how many attendees we have in the meeting. Right now, we've got 40. And we can also, we have a list of names that we can provide after the meeting for people who are interested in that.
Right now we have 49, actually. Looks like 40, but I think it's 49. Okay.
Okay.
So thank you, Krista. Let's go
Sure.
to the next.
All right, so I'm going to go in order then. So S. Goodman asked whether these documents will be available on the town's website. I did post the Junction Village Task Force webpage into the Q&A. And then somebody else asked, okay, Nat Welch asked whether 1B on the webpage is the same as 1B that we're looking at today is the same as one of the 3 that are on the task force website. So no, the 3 on the task force website were preliminary plans that the committee, the task force reviewed, and Bill consolidated into the 2 plans that we're looking at today. So the 2 plans that we're looking at today will go up on that webpage. Okay.
How about one more, Krista, and then I'll put it to the group themselves if someone wants to ask a question live. How about one more from the Q&A?
Okay, and then we have a lot of questions in the Q&A. So, so okay, for one more for now, S. Goodman asks, does this plan include access to the Baker Avenue area offices? And I said, no, that's on the other side of the Assabet. Marcia, maybe you could talk about the bridge plan, which is a separate project, completely separate project.
What I think you're referring to is the Assabet River pedestrian bridge that is currently in design, and it would connect the Concord Park Assisted Living site to 300 Baker Ave site. And if one were to walk to the end of where the commuter rail parking lot ends at the along the platform, and look out over the river to the left or north, you can visualize that's the approximate location where the new bridge would be located. It will be visible from the commuter rail bridge that already exists and parallel to that, and it will be connecting the two sites. Right now, it is in design, and we are seeking additional design funds through the Community Preservation Committee to complete that design. We will be going after some grants as well, and seeking some additional town support for that. So that's where that stands right now. We're hoping to have it designed in a way that will make it available for the statewide TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan that the state puts forward, and so that it would be funded by, construction would be funded by the state. But that hasn't yet, we don't have the final details of that component.
Thank you, Marcia. Is there anyone in the group that wants to ask a question live? If not, we'll just go back to Krista. If you do, just
Could S. Goodman put your address in the chat? Thanks. In the Q&A.
Delia Kay, Director of Natural Resources, has raised her hand. Delia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for all your work on this proposal and for a great presentation. I just wanted to touch on two aspects of the project. So the Natural Resources Commission had approved the 83-unit assisted living facility in 2017. And as part of that, there was discussion about placing a conservation restriction on both the riverfront parcel and the parcel that is referred to as the triangle. And the CHDC was comfortable with the riverfront parcel. Actually, they proposed both restrictions on both the riverfront parcel and the triangle. And the commission recommended you probably will want to have some programming on, so don't put a CR on the triangle parcel. Leave that just as an open space parcel. So with a conservation restriction, it's very challenging. I think it's going to be difficult for the CHDC to receive an approvable conservation restriction with the amount of hardscape that is proposed. So I think that needs to be thought about and considered with usually with conservation restrictions, it's like the rest of our conservation land where you have trails and, you remove invasive species and you might have some interpretive panels. And I think there's a lot of good information that is valuable to be interpreting here. And there, the asphalt versus the gravel, that I think that's up for discussion. But for a lot of the other stuff, I think it's going to be hard to get that CR approved as this plan is currently designed. And then the second aspect is just the Wetlands Protection Act, where, Bill, could you pull up one of the plans and highlight where the 100-foot inner riparian zone is?
Well, that's hard because we didn't really emphasize that. The 100-foot is here.
That's it. Yep.
200
So if
is
you-
here.
Right. So the 100-foot is the critical one to be thinking about. So if you go just scroll up and down the plan and show where that 100-foot runs across the property. So it goes down, it includes a lot of the structure that's proposed. And I understand that the site is disturbed, but the way the Wetlands Protection Act regulations view disturbance is, it has to have basically an absence of topsoil. So it's paved or it's a landfill or junkyard or something like that. So DEP would not view that inner riparian as a disturbed site. And that makes it very challenging to propose. You basically cannot alter within that first 100 feet. So, anything I think that, again, a trail may be feasible. That's a question. But some of the other, the amphitheater and some of these other structures, the nooks and these sorts of things are going to be really challenging to get approved with the Natural Resources Commission. So I'm just going to encourage that the task force is looking towards that triangle parcel as where you're programming your major sort of areas of development. When the Natural Resources Commission talked about this with the Grantham Group and CHDC, actually it's mostly with the Grantham Group in 2017, that riverfront parcel was talked about for trails and, invasives removal and benches. And I think there's a lot more, there's a lot of history here and there's a lot of beauty in the parcel, but I think we just need to be sensitive to the conservation restriction that needs to go on the parcel as part of the order of conditions under the NRC, as well as any permitting requirements that would be required to do a lot of the elements of this current plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Delia. Thank you for all of those clarifications. Is there someone else who wants to ask or add a live question? If not, I'll go back to Krista on the Q&A chat. Okay, I don't see any hands. So Krista.
Sorry, Carlene, we've got one hand raised.
Oh, sorry, I can't see it. So Chris, thank you.
Yeah, it's Nat Welch. I'll promote him now.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Welch. If you can hear us, if you just could state your name and your address.
Yes. Been there. I'm Nat Welch, 141 Stowe Street. I'm appearing just as co-chair of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee. And first, I want to thank the task force for all its hard work. It's exciting to see that something's going to happen on the northern side of the trail as you go from Neshoba Brook to Comm Avenue. It looks really good. I had just two questions that relate to kind of our areas of interest. One is you have two entrances from the rail trail into the space, both triangular one and the one by the river. And I guess given Delia's most recent comments, maybe not a lot's going to happen along the river as it turns out. But anything that we can do to help make that happen, we'd like to support that. The second question is there are a set of railroad tracks that actually there's a switch that starts to curve the tracks towards the prison, which was where the siding was. And I don't know, and this may be expensive. One of the things that we did on the Neshoba Brook Bridge was we retained the rails and essentially filled them with concrete. It was kind of a very nice approach. And I don't know if in your work in the triangular section, you might consider, and we could work with you to maybe save part of that curve of the rail and put a sign there that kind of explains the importance of that siding, because it was the one that went to the roundhouse and also connected to the Reformatory Branch Trail and near the Reformatory Branch Hotel. So those were just the two comments I had. And I had a third one, which is I'd just like to know what the construction will do to the rail trail. Will there be vehicles crossing the rail trail during construction? And so those are my three questions. And then personally, I just wanted to note as a resident that the idea of an amphitheater, an outdoor amphitheater that had seating that was comfortable and was a place where theater or music or other things could happen, I would strongly support that. And I guess it's not going to happen in the riparian zone anymore. But if we could keep something like that, I think that would be a real draw for people walking from West Concord to actually attend something in that space. So thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Nat. Marcia, could you address the questions that Nat asked about how the rail trail will be impacted and also the rails themselves, how they might be preserved?
I think that's a design detail that we'll get into as we develop whichever plan we move forward with, but I'm not sure that it went off to the hotel or if it went right into the prison. I think that this was one of the ways that they got into the prison, but I'd have to better understand
Yep.
the two.
You're right.
And how they delivered goods and took goods away from the facility. But the suggestion that it be integrated and retained is really important.
Thank you, Marcia. Let's go back to Krista. Krista, why don't you ask some of the questions in the Q&A chat? Please, if you hear your question asked and your name raised, please type your address into the Q&A so that Sue Felshen can record it for the minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna group a couple of questions about paths and surfacing. Pamela Dritt asked if there will be any natural trails, gravel, or simply mowed, or will they all be paved? Betty H asked, do strollers and wheelchairs travel on the course? Nat Welch asked if all the paths are ADA compliant. And there was one other question about snow removal. And Stephen Bader asked, the winter maintenance plans would help inform choice of pavement materials. Is that why asphalt is planned for most paths?
Thank you, Krista. Bill, can you take the majority of those questions?
Sure. Because I'm involved and I'm a registered design professional, everything that I do has to be ADA compliant. So all of these paths, all of these plazas have to meet ADA surfacing requirements so that somebody that's mobility impaired or visually impaired can safely walk on the paths. So the answer to the question is yes. Everything that we do on the project that is hardscape will be paths, will be ADA compliant, which answers the question, will we be designing casual paths that walk through the woods that are gravel or grass? And the answer is no, we won't. Generally, those kind of paths emerge on their own because they're a logical progression where people walk. But because we're involved and this is a public access, publicly funded project, we're not currently proposing naturalized trails. There has been no discussion of 365-day usage. We're still unclear as to how and who's going to maintain this, who's going to take ownership responsibility. I don't believe, and members of the committee can correct me, that we're thinking of plowing this or lighting this, because I did see some of those questions. This would be a dawn to dusk and as available. I can't imagine that the Parks Department would want to plow sidewalks on a remote path in the middle of winter. So that's the answer to those questions.
Thank you, Bill. Krista, back to you.
Oh, I think Delia.
Oh, actually, I see Delia raising a hand. Go ahead, Delia.
Hi, thanks. I'm just going to clarify that this will remain a privately owned parcel owned by CHDC. So when it has a conservation restriction held on it by the town does not assume the maintenance of it. So it wouldn't be the Parks Department unless an arrangement was made with the town and CHDC for the maintenance. And can I just make one more point that I forgot to make prior?
Sure.
So I just, I think there's so many good ideas that are being put forward as part of this proposal, but I would just sort of look for a little bit of a pause just because of the work that's going on across the street at the Giroux parcel, where there's, again, the adjacency to the Bruce Freeman, the connection to the pond, Warner's Pond. They're putting in a pavilion and trails and a lot of amenities that I think maybe we don't need to duplicate, and I understand that there's some differences, and I really like the interpretive of the historical information that you're proposing here, but when it's spread out over such a large site, I think that you might lose some of the the community gathering that you're looking for when it's over that larger 6-acre parcel. I think a lot can be accomplished on that smaller triangle parcel. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Delia. Back to Krista.
Okay, S. Goodman asks about a budget for the project. Who wants to take that?
Liz Rust, is that that's something that you have at the ready, or should I discuss that for the group?
Yeah, I do not have any new
Yeah.
information on that.
I don't think we have a budget yet. And it's because we don't know what the final design is going to be, what the final materials are going to be, or anything. We are requesting $300,000 from the Community Preservation Committee to that will be voted in the spring at town meeting as the initial design elements. So trying to get in some of getting in the paths, doing the invasive species removal, and finalizing some of these design elements, maybe getting the bike racks so that we can get people off their bikes so that they'll walk the trails. But I think once the design has been put together, then we can develop a true, realistic budget. And it may require that we go back to the CPC multiple times or one more time. I don't know. We'll have a better sense of that once the design has been finalized, and we'll know more information when we get around to that final design in January. I think you said the second meeting would be.
Yeah.
We do know that there is a commitment from the Grantham Group, who will be constructing Christopher Heights Assisted Living, for up to $25,000 of invasive species removal. So they'll be there with some heavy equipment. They might be able to help us remove those washing machines that have been left behind, or remove some of the invasives, bittersweet, buckthorn. There's a host of invasives that we have to deal with there. So that's where we are right now as far as the budget goes.
Thank you, Marcia. Krista, back to you.
Okay, Pamela Dritt had a couple questions about different types of plant materials. I know Bill covered some of it. I guess maybe with this questions about specific plants, maybe, is there a way should we tell people like how they can provide written input, after this meeting? And maybe suggestions like that about specific plants could go, Bill?
Yeah, so there are a whole lot of guidelines out there for pollinator friendly meadows as well as gardens. So the majority of this site will be pollinator friendly meadow mix, which absolutely would include milkweed and a whole lot of other asters and other kind of flowers that the pollinators will enjoy. We'll of course have the specific wildflower meadow. So we're not going to discount anything that isn't indigenous, encourages pollinators, and can be controlled by the standard methods that we maintain a garden or a meadow in this case. So the short answer is all of our indigenous plants that grow in New England that are pollinator friendly will be encouraged. As I had said before, we'll probably mow those meadows no more than twice a year to make sure that shrubs and trees and woody plants don't get a foothold, but that's about it. We will hopefully maintain it to the degree that we'll take out invasive species and non-natural species. So I want to answer it in a very broad way.
Hey, Krista, Pamela Dritt has her hand raised. Maybe she wants to speak to that. Okay, hold on.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for all your hard work. First, please, Chris, don't use webinar format. Use a regular meeting format. Even the light board has stopped using webinar. It's very frustrating to go to a public meeting and not be able to see who is attending. And we haven't had any problems with Zoom bombers or anything like that. And all the board meetings that I've been going to since Zoom has allowed us access. So please, in any future meetings, and if it's possible to switch this one from webinar format to regular, please do so. But any future ones, please do regular meeting format.
Thank you
Um,
for your feedback, Pamela. That's helpful.
What I wanted to ask mostly about is, I appreciate your doing indigenous plants and pollinators and so forth, but consider also human food, trees that are edible, like mulberry trees, plums, apples, edible nut trees, blackberry bushes, black raspberry bushes, other berries, blueberries, particularly in an area where they naturally grow wild. Those would be very, very good because after all, we're hunter-gatherers, and being able to reach out and pluck a berry and put it in your mouth is a wonderful thing.
Thank you, Pamela. Is there any, I can't see hands raised. Is there another person who has a hand raised if someone wants to ask a live question?
I think
That's another advantage to meeting format. You can always all see it.
Thank you, Pamela.
I think Dory Kehoe is next.
Go ahead, Dory.
Ms. Kehoe, you're on the panel. If you could just state your name and address.
Unmute. Okay. Hi, Dory Kehoe, 51 MacArthur Road. I'd like to follow up on something that Delia mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and that was a pause. And here's a couple of reasons why I have a question. Can you hear me now at all?
Yes, we can, Dory.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you very much. First of all, this is all predicated in the spacing on Grantham getting final funding to go ahead. That still has not been secured. And I'm assuming that they will, but if for some reason something happens and it doesn't get signed, sealed, and delivered, I wonder if it's wise to have final plans already for their definition of what they would plan to do when other possibilities might come down the road. So that's just one thought to keep in mind. And the second one, mentioning Grantham, is I hadn't realized, not mentioning Grantham, but thinking about the CHDC, I guess I hadn't realized that the maintenance of all of this will be funded by the CHDC, whose main objective is housing and affordable housing. And so I'm sure the CHD knows what they're talking about, but how are they going to raise the money? Because maintaining a place like this is quite considerable. So before those two things are known, I would really say that what you're doing is absolutely splendid. And I love all the work you've done. But before we go into getting hard dollars put into something like this, and you're looking for a good chunk of money this year from the CPC, I really think these items need to be clarified. Finally, just a very small issue, and that is there are a lot of people who don't ride bikes and can't walk the distance to get there. So if this is going to be something you're talking about having some sort of public music or plays like that, where will people park? They're not going to be able to park. They can't go on the trail. Will whoever is who has the facility there allow parking? And then the last one, which is something which some of you know is something near and dear to my concern, and that is biking and people, especially people of low mobility. And so a lot of your visitors are going to be coming from the rail trail. How and where are you going to not only suggest that they park, but really urge them to? Because that trail looks really tempting to me to stay on my bike if I'm coming in from the Bruce Freeman Trail. And if people from whatever kind of a facility there is associated, I wonder if it's all well to wait till you see what's going to be in there and where it is finally, before you go any further. But I think what you're doing is you're doing a huge amount and in a very short time. So I congratulate you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dory, for all that feedback. Marcia, I don't know if you want to respond to any of those questions. I'll just say that we we do realize that the Grantham development is still in the works, but it is our feeling and the feeling of the select board, though I don't want to speak for that body, that we wanted to move on this and not and start working out a plan so that when something does happen, we're ready to go. This is strictly a non-biking path. The idea is that people, and there will be signs posted. There's not going to be a police officer stationed at the entrances, certainly, but signs will be posted asking people to get off their bikes, and there will be ample space for them to install their bikes in bike racks. It is intended fully as a walkable park, a park that people walk to on foot or ride their bikes to. There is no plan for any sort of parking lot or provided parking as the plan now stands. I see Marcia unmuted herself. So Marcia, any context, or Liz, please?
Well, I was going to say Liz might have a comment, an update on the Christopher Heights project, but I also wanted to reiterate something that Bill Murray said at the very beginning, is that the paths would be narrow. They would not be wide enough for bikes and people. And I think we're talking about a 4 foot wide or 5 foot wide path that would 5 foot max. Okay, so 5 foot wide path is not suitable as a bike path of any kind. So I think that will help discourage people from riding their bikes, but would be wide enough to allow a stroller or a person in a wheelchair or walker to use the path.
Right. So I just wanted to add a little bit on the Grantham status. I know we weren't really going to talk about that, but they have obtained all of their financing commitments, and they're working very hard towards their wastewater completion of design and other conditions in order to close on their financing and obtain their building permit. And the other thing I would mention is something else that Bill mentioned, that this is a multi-stepped plan, and the invasive species removal is about a 5-year effort. So it is kind of paused even just for that activity. So it's important for the planning to go forward and to start at least that part, because of the long lead time to ensure that those species are actually removed and not going to grow back.
Thank you, Liz and Marcia. Krista, back to you.
Okay, there were a couple questions about site amenities that I'll group together. Andy Putrick asked whether restrooms would be provided, and Pamela Dritt asked about waste baskets and picnic tables.
Bill?
Sure. No to restrooms. Absolutely not. We are discussing waste baskets, but that goes hand in hand with the maintenance. Currently, the thought process is carry in, carry out. Picnic tables are definitely an amenity that we're hoping we can install, but we have those nice lawn areas to the south of either the recessed lawn or the amphitheater, and they could be spread a blanket instead of a picnic basket. And they would be, in fact, those areas would be mowed as a maintained area. So no decision on picnic tables. Waste baskets still in discussion, but it really relies on how this is being maintained by whom and the frequency, but no restrooms.
Thank you, Bill. Just as a time check, it's 20 past 6. I hope to wrap the meeting up within the next 15 minutes. Again, if you want to raise your hand, please hit that feature, but I'd like to go back to Krista and her masterful coupling and grouping of multiple questions. Krista.
Okay, and there's still a lot that I haven't even seen yet, so I'm still going through the ones that were asked during the earlier part of the meeting. So Jonathan Abel asked, noted that the triangle area looks like it might have been used for parking trucks at one point. Maybe there's some oil stains, and will there need to be any site remediation done?
Bill?
I don't think so. We didn't see any significant oil stains. The sand, the soils out there are sands and gravels, and a lot of what has happened is washed away. But we can't answer that question definitively. There doesn't really seem to be anything that's present on the surface, and there doesn't seem to be a historical presence on the ground. But the answer to the question is we need to look into that further.
Thank you, Bill.
Oh, sorry, I wanted to add that I was trying to answer questions as I could in the chat. And if anyone doesn't get a satisfactory answer, chime in if my answer wasn't enough. So Greg Higgins asked a number of questions. I think most of them have been addressed already. One that I don't think I heard was whether there will be canoe landing area.
A what?
Canoe landing.
Not currently. The majority of this site, boy, more than 90% of the site is an incredibly steep, dangerous riverbank, probably 15 to 20 feet tall. I know I walked the entire length of it flagging the wetlands. You just can't get from the river to this site in a safe manner unless we actually build a set of stairs, which is, you heard, probably not going to happen. So the short answer is no, there's no compatible open water location that can access the river from this site.
Thank you, Bill. Krista.
Okay, Rebecca Bryant Gates asked, will the river be cleaned up of all the fallen trees? And my response was that's not part of the scope of this project, but I don't know if Delia wants to add any. Is Delia still here? No, no, it's not part of the scope of this project. Oh, okay. Delia, do you want to say anything about trees in the river? I know you were working on that.
She's going to jump back on the panel.
Okay.
Hi, so it takes a minute to rejoin as a panelist. We generally, unless there are obstructions to the river that are full across the river obstructions, we would not remove trees. They provide a lot of habitat for fish and wildlife that we don't want to remove. So if the question is, would we take out fallen trees? Unless they're stem to stern across the river that causes, a hazard to safety, then we wouldn't take them out. We would just leave those in, but we evaluate those on a case by case.
Thank you, Delia. I'd like to go back to the live questions. If someone, I can't see hands raised for some reason.
Yes, we've got two hands raised, and I think Andy Putrick just had a question that was in the Q&A, so maybe he wants to follow up on that.
That's fine.
Mr. Putrick, you're on the panel. If you could just state your name and address.
Yes, my name is Andy Puckrick. I'm on 164 Belknap Street in Concord. Thank you for your attempt at having an open meeting. Hi, Liz, how you doing? I had a question for Bill Murray. Thank you for your exposition here, but could you give me a quick, the executive overview of the difference between, 1B and 2B, if I could be so bold? Thank you.
Or do you want me to share screen or just describe it?
Well, just give me the words would be fine, just what the differences are between 1B and 2B.
There are two principal differences. We've changed the design of the triangular piece so that the entry on 2B is a little southerly and it's a little more, I would call it biomorphic. The historical and the cultural plazas are a little more remote so that you would have to hunt them down. Whereas in 1B, the scheme, the entrance plaza is a little bit to the north, and the historical and the cultural plazas are a little more linear along the path of travel, so that you don't go out of your way to get to them, that they're really right along the line of travel. And again, really the only other significant difference is the amphitheater versus the recessed lawn. So that's the big executive.
And Bill, do you anticipate, what do you anticipate the amphitheater being used for? Is that just going to be ad hoc? Is it going to be scheduled events or small groups of people that are going to be managed by the town? How does that work?
I can answer that to the extent because the committee has had an awful lot of discussion. They would love to see it used as an outdoor classroom. They would love to see it used as part of the storybook path. They would love to see it used as a structured venue that somebody could schedule, and they would love to see it used as passive recreation space. So it's there, and it would be open to the public and be able to be used by the public in a wide variety of cases. How'd I do, committee members?
You did beautifully, Bill. The idea, Andy, was just the sort of go back to our transcendentalist roots with the Lyceum, the idea that people could have a talk there, people could gather for a poetry reading or a book club, and also within walking distance to so many constituencies, Carousel, Concord Children's Center, Minuteman Arc, the Council on Aging, the idea that it could be sort of a place to sort of absorb nature, learn about nature. That was the intent of that sort of space. You know, all of this, it's important to understand, to Delia's point, but just in general, to Dory's point as well, that these are concepts that were floating by the community, the town. We have, you know, a lot of work to do in terms of, this is a multi-year process, but this is where we have arrived, and this will, you know, clearly morph. I love the idea of that amphitheater back there. I see that a third of it is in the no zone area there. And so, you know, well, this will have to evolve anyway. But the idea was just an open space where people can safely gather, be together, learn, live, thrive, you know, relax, some of the things that you saw in the presentation. You said there were 2 hands up, Chris. Is there another person that we could call on whose hand up is up, and then we'll go back to Krista?
Yeah, there's one more. There's Pam Rockwell. We'll have her join now.
Thank you. It takes a minute for the person to become a panelist. There we go. Hello, Pam.
Hi, sorry. That does take a while to join the meeting. So I'm really concerned, like Delia, about the plans to overdevelop the eastern pathway along the river. So the river is not just in a 100-foot wetland zone. It is also designated as a wild and scenic river as part of the National Park Service by Congress. And that means that you're not supposed to be developing things that can be seen from the river. So trying to develop this as a really aggressive place where dozens of people are going to be gathering for shows and events, I think that is an unreasonable use of this property. The idea of an amphitheater where somebody might be charging for a show or doing things in large groups or doing anything where you are not providing parking for the handicapped people that you're talking about making it accessible to is a real challenge, I think. And I think that you should really scale back what's happening in that eastern section. Yes, there should be amplification of the trail that's already there so that it is more accessible. But I really would like to see this respect for the river that's there and keeping it as natural as possible. I also want to point out that in addition to the Giroux land up there, there is a path along the Neshoba Brook that connects from the other side of the bridge over Neshoba Brook. There is a walking path along Neshoba Brook, then along the river to the end of the bike trail, to the end of the railroad parking lot there. And there is already a gathering space that is used by Concord Carlisle High School and by other groups occasionally for get-togethers. It's just a circle of rocks that you can sit and have, you know, a mild, respectful outdoor classroom kind of experience, but it does exist already. If you want to do something, think of that scale. Don't think of the scale of an amphitheater or a soccer field or something like that. I think the people that are going to be using this are going to be a few people at a time, not 30 people at a time. I'm really, if you're looking for that kind of, that's functionally encouraging people to trespass at various spaces nearby and not to a really good use of that beautiful that beautiful space next to the river there.
Thank you. Pam.
And I did actually want to ask Bill, is it indeed the path that you have along that side of the, along the side of the river there that you were planning on paving? That's an already existing path, right? That you're just making accessible.
Right now, the only path actually comes from MCI Concord and probably comes into the site along the top of the bank, maybe 100 feet.
Okay.
Other than that, the rest of this site along the river is impassable. If you want to walk through it, you got to walk through multiflora rose, you got to walk through Oriental bittersweet, it's virtually impassable. It's very, very hard. There is no path along the river. The point I wanted to make about the amphitheater is there's an existing depression there already, and there are embankments that are involved with it. So this would utilize that depression. You wouldn't see it from the river. The embankment from that, the embankment to the river is 15 to 20 feet tall. And you can look up, but all you're going to see are trees and the top of the embankment. You're not going to see anything. The only thing that might be visible would be our overlooks. And they would be marginally visible. We're going to keep everything that's going on. We're not going to touch the riverbank itself. It's too steep. It's fully vegetated. There's no way we would go anywhere near that. So right now, this parcel is not accessible to anybody in the public. And there is no path. There is no informal path in there that's passable. There used to be, but it's completely grown over and really hard to walk through, as other members of the committee can tell you.
So is there a reason why you put your paved path in the middle of the 100-foot wetlands exclusion instead of putting it a little further west?
Well, the Wetland Protection Act also addresses open space and recreation. And if you're walking in this property, what you really want to see is you want to see the Assabet River and the forest and both sides of it. We thought removing the path from proximity to the assisted living will preserve the open nature space of what the ultimate property will look like if we can get rid of the multiflora rose and those incredible vines and all the trip hazards. So the answer to the question is we're trying to optimize for the use of people and the visualization that comes with a piece of property like this.
Okay, I'm still very uncomfortable with the amount of development that you're doing on that eastern side of the property there.
I have heard those comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pamela. Back to you, Krista.
Sure. I just wanted to add, Pam, that I reached out to ORS and the River Stewardship Council. I think you probably, because I saw Emma Lord was on that attending this. So we're looking forward to more feedback on that.
Okay.
John Schummers asked about the plan. There's a second bluish green area to the east of the eastern area. Is that a wetland? And Bill, I think that's the area where it drops off down into the floodplain.
Sure. I'm not sharing anymore, right?
Right.
Okay.
You can share. You are not sharing this moment, but you can pull that up. That'd be great.
Am I up?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so below the words Assabet River, you see blue. That's actual open water. Where you see the paler green with the dashed line around it, that's bordering vegetated wetlands. So there is a peninsula of it certainly gets inundated during the spring floods. And in here, this is an inlet of, it's a wet meadow more than anything else. So the answer to the question, if that's what you're referring to, is the answer is yes, it's bordering vegetated wetland and floodplain.
Thank you, Bill. Krista, it's a 6:35. I'm mindful of time. Maybe you can scan the questions that are uniquely answerable by Bill or another Marcia or Liz or someone else on the panel.
Sure. Okay. One thing I didn't see when I was talking about the site amenities, I'll just comment on this. Kevin Nystrom asked about picnic tables, but also places for kids to play. Would love to see structures for the youngest generation. We didn't really talk about play structures, but perhaps like natural natural play features is something we could think about.
Those are fun.
So keep that in mind.
Evan Nystrom, if you're still here, I need your address in the Q&A, please.
Thank you, Sue. Go ahead, Krista.
Simon Cataldo asked what state approvals are required to see this through. Now, for the conservation restriction, that does have to be approved, reviewed and approved by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs has to sign it. So that does have a very thorough review process. I don't know if there are any other state. I don't think for the open space there are any.
Well, the Wetlands Protection Act is a quasi state and local regulation, so we would need approval under that. If we got appealed under the Wetlands Protection Act, we might have to go to MIPA. And again, depending upon what our funding source is, if state funds are involved, that may complicate that permit process. But principally, I would think that the Wetlands Protection Act and the Natural Resources Committee would be where we would start.
Thank you, Bill.
Somebody else asked if we have endangered species, and there are no mapped endangered species on the site right now. And the Assabet River is not considered an outstanding resource water at this point in time.
Krista, how about a couple more questions?
Okay, yeah, I think just two more. I think everything else has been covered. Gary Kleinman asks or makes a comment about the multi-stage process. Oh, he does have a question. I wonder if you're thinking ahead to placing this lovely trail infrastructure in the context of a broader trail network. This may be the time to obtain an easement across Department of Corrections land and to get a pedestrian bridge along Route 2 into the tip, given how long these things take. Expanding the trails and access along the Assabet is supported by Envision Concord Village Center study and West Concord Master Plan. Like Gary's big thinking.
Gary is a big thinker, and those are fantastic ideas. Gary, we appoint you to the committee that looks at that project in the future.
Carlene, I've added my email address for anyone whose questions don't get answered this evening and they want to send those questions. It will be, I think the committee meets next Thursday, so you could take those questions and we could then develop the responses for them if you wish. That way we can capture things that were not answered this evening and additional ideas as people think about them or think about what they've seen here or heard this evening, and provide us with that input.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marcia. Krista, you said you only had one more question. Let's hear it.
Well, there's kind of two. Gary Clayton asks, Bill, does your scope of services include preparing a detailed plan, budget, and ongoing schedule of maintenance and restoration of the proposed parkland area?
Yes.
Bill, do you want to elaborate just with a sentence?
I thought the one-word sentence would do it.
It was excellent, but maybe Gary wants a little more. Knowing Gary.
Yes, my scope of services, we take this plan or whatever derivation of this plan and we refine it. We've got more information now from the Grantham group, and we will get into the meat and potato design details a little bit more by means of example, how we're going to connect to the rail trail, the disposition of handicap accessible crossing across the rail trail while maintaining the trails, and some of the more detail. Probably before that meeting in January, we will have a sit down with natural resources in one form or another and other stakeholders in specific, because this meeting was intended to be broad brush, but we would like specific comments from other entities. And hopefully the meeting in January, a single plan will be developed with a lot more details and a lot more specificity. Hopefully at that time, we'll break it into phases, but until it's funded, we can only take it so far.
Right. And Krista, one final.
I was just going to say Liz has something to add.
Oh,
I just saw in the comments that a few people have gone and looking in the property and look, getting on and looking for, how the plan would work. The property is not open to the public right now. It is owned by the CHGC. They're looking at how to arrange for some organized site walks so that some more exploration can be done. but they would like me to discourage people just going by themselves onto the property.
Thank you, Liz. Final question, Krista.
So Nat Welch and Barbara Pike asked again about construction vehicles crossing the trail. And I think the answer was, we don't really know that yet. I mean, public safety will be obviously a important part of any construction on the site, but Marcia.
Well, I know that construction for the Christopher Heights project will be via the existing service road over Department of Corrections land, or from Route 2 through the former Elm Place Road that exists there and coming in on the easterly side of the MCI wall. And I would hope that we could work out a similar kind of arrangement for with the Department of Corrections to access this site as it's developed over the years.
Thank you, Marcia. Krista, I'm going to close down the Q&A portion. Is that all right with you?
I think we covered everything.
Okay, Bill, any final comments, or I know you've spoken a lot tonight, so are you set for me to close down the meeting?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you. I just want to thank everyone who's in attendance. This was illuminating. Again, Bill used the right word. This was intended to be broad brush, to give you an idea of some of our ideas, some of our thoughts, visions, some of the things that we have done to incorporate different aspects, different populations. This is a very special site as we see it. We see it as an opportunity to bring more people into a walkable space in the village. It is not our intention to overprogram the site, so please understand that as well. And we invite you to attend our meetings. All of our agendas and minutes are posted on our website. And all these plans, if the 3 original concept plans are there now, by tomorrow, the newly rendered final plans will be available for your review. And please look to your email notices for the next iteration of this meeting, which will happen sometime after the new year. All best to everyone. Thank you so much for attending. It's been our pleasure, and I hope it's been yours.